See, that's the point.
material,
Like the
pads.
skin on your face, typically you more or less need to operate in that environment. The air, you need to work in that environment as well. So the point is to try to minimize the use of materials that can, in some circumstances, attenuate performance.
Before we get started today, just wanted to show you guys 2 new colors of Diana TC we've got on the custom shop. And we're adding colors constantly, so check out our website for it. But we've got like a golden look here, and I don't know, what is it, like a limey green?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
Very
there's
bright.
probably, this week we probably added about half a dozen colors. We sold some too, which we should remind people, these are limited edition.
Right.
We might make 1 or 2, depends.
Yeah.
But we're not making, there's no mass market here. We're just, here's a color. The guy's having fun back
Yeah,
there.
then we're moving on to
mixing
the
up
next
paints.
color, right?
Yeah, make another one.
Most of these we literally only did one.
Yeah, there's
because
one
they're
for
difficult
most, yeah.
to reproduce.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you're really getting one of a kind. Most people are getting one of a kinds here. So have at it. Visit our website at bizheadphones.com. You know, if you do things long enough, you have enough history where you can see trends. And I know I've seen this over the decades in in high-end audio, 2-channel audio speakers systems, where our business started in 1990. In the early 90s, loudspeakers were like, tonally speaking, measurement-wise, were everywhere, all over the place. Bright speakers, dark speakers. There was no rhyme or reason to it. And I mean, back then there wasn't a lot of people, I think, that had easy access to measurement gear that you can get today to measure speakers. You know, all you need is a mic and some software and a computer and a calibrated mic, and you're pretty much G2G. So anyway, bottom line is that over time, what I saw with that was that, things would be kind of bright sounding. So let's say the speakers were bright and dark. Now you got guys making electronics to try to match this stuff, right? And so they're doing that with the electronics. They're making things bright or dark to compensate for the bright or dark speakers. They're trying to match up with whatever they use for a reference, okay? So that stuff was all over the place. Now, as time went on, you hit, let's say, year 2000, things started to settle out a bit, but it went the other way. So you went from, what happened is you started to get a sinusoidal effect where things would be bright, 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 and people would be, oh, wow, it's so great, it's bright, I can hear all this stuff. Then it got too bright where people go, oh, it's bad, Then the speaker manufacturers and stuff started going the other way, softening things a little bit. Crossovers got softer. Electronics tubes got into more popularity, right? So now the sign went with the other way. Now things started getting dull sounding. And if you compared it to what was, so now people are getting bored with their stuff. So it's like, oh, this isn't as good. So now you go the other way. Things get bright. And this goes over a 30-year period. You might have seen. Now what happened over time was that this fluctuation, high to low, started to level out a bit. Where nowadays, fast forward 30 plus years, most speakers are pretty flat, level. I mean, in terms of, what they're doing.
Relatively. Yeah.
So now here comes headphones. And we've got maybe 10 years, or so into this in terms of how the industry's grown. And now we're starting to see a cycle. Or a cycle going on already here. And
We're definitely seeing a shift, and there's a few reasons for it. I think headphones came in at a curious time, because initially when headphones started to become a mainstream popular thing, and by this I mean more or less like expensive headphones, information just started becoming more freely available. The internet started taking off, right? So you got easier exchange of information, knowledge, and these sorts of deals. And this clearly has an impact on the design methodology and language of products, and the way you communicate with manufacturers and the expectations and all these things. And now we're seeing more things with measurement focus as well. And that also is having an impact on the sonic character, the design of headphones. People are emphasizing measurements more. And that makes sense. It's a rational thing to do. But the curious thing is you don't always see a correlation between an improvement in the measurement and an improvement in the perceived sonic fidelity. So I guess the question is, does it matter? Should you be chasing the measurement or should you be chasing sonic perfection? Because people say they're one and the same, and they should be. That's the end goal. But in practice, a lot of times you don't see that correlation quite as strongly as maybe you might anticipate.
Well, I think it's like a march towards like maturity of like an entire industry, you know? Like it starts out, extremes, and over time, everybody learns, gets feedback from the customers, you know, and eventually everybody ends up relatively in the same kind of space over time, but it takes time. Right?
We're kind of early stages right now.
Still relatively.
So that's the thing. It's interesting the space we're in right now because you have such a good feedback loop where company will make a product, they'll make a change, they'll make an adaptation for a reason or another, and they get fast feedback, relatively speaking, so they can make changes in 3 months, 6, 12 months, and it could be a radically different product. And that's very encouraging, that's good, but it's interesting we're seeing right now the impacts of this, the measurement shift and the feedback from consumers and stuff like that. And it's curious from like a manufacturer perspective, how oftentimes the difference or an improvement even in a measurement doesn't correlate to a seemingly improved average experience of the consumer.
Well, the problem we're having is one of the subjective side of nature versus objective here, which is what you're saying. And the issue being is that on headphones, the measurements don't really correlate to the overall subjective experience. You know, and I mean, so now you got guys we're seeing companies use to smoothen the measurements, to please the measurement, whoever they are. People who are looking only at measurements and saying, oh, it must be good.
Right.
You're putting more and more absorption materials in the headphones, which sops up acoustic information. So, oh yeah, look at the measure smooth, or I got rid of these bumps in the mid-range, and now look at how nice and smooth it is. But it sounds like you're underground. It sounds like there's no sound there. It sounds like you're in space listening to a point somewhere that happens to be putting out a voice going, hi, this is me and I'm singing.
Something like that, yeah.
Well, I think it's also a diminishing return situation because, you know, all right, you're already at like whatever, 0.05, you know, distortion. So there's not much more.
Yeah, I mean, you start getting under a
lowering.
0.1%, a couple of tenths of a percent. And,
Yeah.
I mean, everything else is distorting too. So we've talked about this. We did a
Did we
video
ever
on
link
distortion.
that distortion test thing before? Maybe we should put it in the description of this video. But there's a test you could do. You know, the distortion keeps increasing.
yeah.
You click when you could start hearing it.
Yeah, right.
It's prone to measurement anomalies, but it is very interesting because then you could use on your system, you could make an estimation of when you could truly start actually hearing distortion.
Right.
And I think for most people, 0.1, 0.5% is kind of actually pretty good. Most people are probably going to be above that on their systems.
Well, yeah, I mean, it obviously depends what you're listening to it on.
Right.
But they had two tests because one was like sine wave and one was with music. And obviously in music, it's way harder.
Way
Sine
different.
wave is way easier.
Yeah, right.
You can pick it up way.
Yeah, you can hear from pure sine and you start adding distortion to it at some point. And I think, you know, even with that test, it's still subjective. You got people are going to fool themselves.
Well, you could just click
You know,
earlier.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
So it's like, well,
you're right. Oh, I heard it there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, oh, well.
But if you
And
do
some
it
people
100
like-
times and you really narrow it down, I think you could work past your intrinsic biases and you could actually kind of maybe convince yourself that maybe the distortion isn't as much as you think. Because people are looking for numbers in measurements that are like 0.000. This is like it's so beyond the range of human hearing that it's unlikely that improving the distortion to those levels is going to have a massive improvement in sonic character.
The key, if you're going to take this test, is don't watch the distortion number.
Yeah, don't
Just
even look at it.
Have your hand on pause or something.
Yeah, that's
When
what I
you
did
hear
the first time. I didn't look
Don't
at it
look
all.
at it because
You can't watch it.
You're talking yourself into a number right away.
Yeah, I didn't know how quickly it was going up, but
Yeah,
it
right.
starts really, really low, so
Yeah.
it takes a while. But
Yeah, and then see if you start noticing, you know. But even then, yeah, we don't listen. Once again, just like all measurements, we don't listen to sine waves. We listen to music, and yeah, with a musical source, it'd be a lot more difficult because music itself has distortions in it, multi-percent distortions in it. It's just part of the recordings. It's the way the instruments produce sound. You know, they don't produce pure sine waves. They're
Not
instruments.
typically, no.
You know.
yeah, but with that test in particular, though, you look in the comments and there was like two camps that formed. You know, everybody's like, "Oh yeah, 0.1," I could hear, and then people are like, "Oh, 7, 8, I don't know."
Yeah, some people
Yeah.
1, 2.
If you're on your phone
I
or
could
something,
see,
right?
I could see
10%.
1.
Yeah.
You know, around 1%, it should become on a sine. It would
Yeah.
should be pretty obvious.
0.5% or 1%, I think most people can hear on most devices. But it is, I think, surprisingly difficult to hear 0.1%. for most
Yeah,
people.
it's
And I'm
pretty
sure a lot of
clean.
people will convince themselves they can hear it, but it is very
But
difficult.
not with music. You know, I
With
mean,
music, it's very, very difficult.
So that brings us to the point is like, okay, why is everyone, not everyone, but why are some companies like we minimize our damping. Like we have open back headphones. All right. If anything's in there, it's minimal. I think Dyna TC is the only time we actually added something to just for the aluminum interior a little bit. We were starting to hear it at that level because everything else was minimized, you know what I mean, in terms of sound. So, but there's nothing actually absorptive in there. I mean, in terms of the back side or the front side, you know, other than the ear pad and your face, you know, I mean, and skin does absorb sound.
Right.
There's nothing you could do about it. It's there. I mean, maybe you could wear something over your skin. You know, wear a reflector around your ear. I know we never tried to do it. Make it more live.
Well, air's dampening as well.
Well, that's true.
Presumably you have air around your headphone
Yeah.
because it's trying to
Or
move the
deeper
air.
pads.
Yeah.
Right.
Volume.
Yeah.
So you could do dampening with the intrinsic materials like that you have to work with either way. See, that's the
material,
point. Like the
pads.
skin on your face, typically you more or less need to operate in that environment. The air, you need to work in that environment as well. So the point is to try to minimize the use of materials that can, in some circumstances, attenuate performance. Because usually these things are Band-Aids. And then the question arises, does the headphone improve? Does it make it a better headphone if you improve something like measurement?
That's the thing.
That's
Okay,
an honest question.
Yeah, you measure it. Okay, so now it ain't as bumpy throughout the waveform. But, I mean, that's a test head looking at it. But how does it sound? And, I mean, to me, that's bottom line. How does it sound? And, you know, if you're listening to it, if you're really listening to it, and you're listening to the music, a wide range of music, and it doesn't sound good, then you need to go back and think about, correlate the measurements. What are they really telling you? Are you actively seeking the right goal here? Or are you just doing it to smoothen things out so that when some guy with a test set measures it, it says, oh, look at that. It's good. Well, yeah, but then who's going to actually, the bottom line is who's going to buy this thing if it doesn't sound good, right? I mean, how long, what's its shelf life? How long is it going to last in the market if it doesn't sound good? I'll tell you how long, not long, not long.
Well, you look at every industry, and before measurements were a thing in every industry, there was a big difference in what products manufacturers shipped. And there's no doubt there were some products that were bad that were shipped when measurements didn't exist in certain industries. People used to make up power figures in the automotive space before dynos were common. But now you really can't get away with that because someone's going to dyno a car you ship. You can't say, oh, it makes 1,000, but it makes 400.
Right.
Obviously, it doesn't work anymore, right? So there's some truth that comes out in the measurements, and that's understandable. And I understand why people are trying to do that for headphones. It makes sense. It's a very rational thing to do. But a question is raised there. Does it make sense? Does it make sense to put a headphone under a microscope to this level when you as the manufacturer have control over every product, every little attribute of the system, and it's possible you could improve something but make something else worse that isn't measured currently? Not to say it can't be measured, but currently isn't typically being measured in the current suite of measurements you typically see. It's like you look at cars. I mean, you could tune a car to be good on a particular track, but does that make it a better car? To most people, it doesn't.
Most people don't ride their cars on a track.
Like most people aren't actually tracking their car all the time. So
it's more what it's like on a street is what matters.
And beyond that, though, like say even if you do track the car, maybe you're track focused. Does tuning it for one track make it good for all tracks? You didn't test that. You only tested one track, so you honestly don't know. And that's sort of where we are right now with measurements. It's not to say they don't matter.
Cars that do really well on tracks are pretty rough on the road. I mean, they're usually bumpy. They're not going to have, a soft suspension to them.
Typically, see, that's the same thing. That's kind of the trouble people run into. You can make a car that isn't rough on the road, that is good on the track.
Put a button.
But all you know is a track time. So it doesn't tell you if it's good on the road or not. It doesn't tell you, right? So you look at this track time and say, well, it's a fast car. It must be good. You honestly don't know from that number, right?
I mean, most cars, like you go look at Porsche or the GTR or something like that, you take it on the road. It even if it has a softer mode,
right?
It
only gets so soft.
Yeah, it's going to be hard when it hits bumps, And I mean, we're speaking. We might not be speaking to everyone that understands it because in the northern climate where we are, our roads suck.
Right.
We got salt and snow, and they get chewed up by snow plows in the winter, and so And they're doing a valiant job this year of paving the living crap out of everything around us, and they're still going at it.
We'll see what it looks like next year,
You know,
next year after
but
the winter.
But yeah, I mean, to have a car like that just isn't any fun. But that's the same deal with headphones. It's like, well, if you're gonna filter the living crap out of the sound for the sake of the measurements, then what the hell good is the sound?
Well, does it make the headphone better?
Right.
Does it make it more desirable to the consumer? Does it bring you more joy and enjoyment?
Well, to some people.
To some people.
Because then you know.
Is there equivalent like this in like anything else in electronics? Like computer, what about computer speed? Weren't they measuring that? They had like the
Well, yeah, it's the
software.
same thing. It's every industry, I think, has a correlation. You
And
look
there were
for the
benchmarks.
longest time, computers' performance was more or less rated in the clock speed. And then they started adding more cores. And now it's number of cores. And you look at some smartphones, they used to advertise 4, 5, 6, 8, 12, whatever cores. And people thought, well, more cores, it must be better. And then you start looking at the benchmarks, and it's like, well, in this benchmark, it isn't actually better, even though it has twice the cores. And then people start saying, well, maybe the benchmarks don't matter, right? So it's like the line keeps moving, and it's interesting. So
Again, sine wave,
Well, sort of, right.
in the industry where it's like, okay, so what are we doing? They're meandering for sales, and is kind of what it is, right? They're looking
yes,
to what impresses. It's kind of like going back to the tube radio days.
Well, I think it's because everybody's always focused on one thing, right? It's like, oh, if you're building you're focused on track performance if you're building a track car, right? If you're building a road car, you're building for on-street performance, but then it means it's bad on track, So, but that's the thing. Everything's so laser focused now that I mean, you got to look at more than one data
Yeah,
point.
with sound, you can't do that.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
it
very
just
difficult.
Can't. It's like it'd be like a cooking or anything like that if you focused on how salty something was. Well, okay, some things taste good with salt.
Well, that's true. I mean, you can have two people make the exact same recipe and come out completely different just based on
Yeah, because they're
technique.
looking at different ways of doing it, the same thing, and that's the beauty of this country and this world is that everybody's got a different way of doing things, and it's kind of cool, and and that it's called choice, and people have dramatic choice in what they purchase and what they hear and what they see and all that, the food they buy and all that.
that's
stuff.
both a pro and a con, though, because you get people online that'll say, this is the best headphone ever made, bar none. And then another will say, I think the exact opposite
Right.
from you. And it's not to say one's right and one's wrong, because generally speaking, music is typically about enjoyment. And so if both of them find their peak enjoyment in this product, they're both right. And that's sort of possible in audio. And that's the fickle nature of it. That's why measurements are kind of becoming more popular, because it makes sense to try to take subjectivity out of it. But the issue is, because it's intrinsically subjective, it's near impossible to do, because you could have a measurement that measures closer to an average target, but it doesn't mean for you it's peak enjoyment. And I guess moreover, does it even matter? That's sort of the bottom line. Is it more valuable that it measures perfectly if it doesn't sound perfect?
Well, I mean, it's not a trend yet, but we're just noticing this, that things are, some designs are getting over filtered, over damped, and
Trying to combat their measurements.
Yeah, right. They're just focusing too much on it. And then there's other designs that have stepped up on the resolution side, like we have, and said, we're really not going to damp anything. We're just going to drop distortion and let it through, let it out there, and so that's the two camps. So it's just a question of where they, what you call, meet.
Well, time.
Through time.
Time, yes.
Yeah, and that's that. Time will tell. We'll see how it goes. And what flushes out? Sales. Who buys this stuff?
Yeah, but everybody lies about that. So
Well, that's true. You
yeah.
never know.
But honestly, that is actually a pretty good
Or how long
indicator.
a model is around.
If people continue to buy a product for a long duration of time, most likely people think it's a good product. If people are willing to spend a lot of money on it, probably it's a pretty good product. But curiously, you see so much change over time now that measurements are becoming more common. And what that does is it makes manufacturers emphasize the measurements more. And that sounds like it could be a good thing, but intrinsically, it's not necessarily always, because there are still the physical limitations. They're the very same as they always were. So I think it makes sense in a lot of ways, and it's better than it was, because it helps people focus on a similar goal, a unified goal. But some manufacturers tend to be going about it a bit too far, and they're kind of misleading the consumer, I think, in a way.
Well, I think the bottom line is that the measurements are really, measurement devices are really made for manufacturers, people who are correlating it to what they're doing. You know, they're changing a component, they're changing a design, and they're seeing what it does from a objective standpoint. But you got to do it from a subjective too, you know. So, I mean, that's all there is to it. It's really they're made for people who are reading into what they're designing.
Yes.
They're really not
Well,
made for the
you
consumer.
made a change, and then you could physically see what that change did.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember back in the day, I don't know if they still do. I didn't even look at my new speakers, but the Bowers and Wilkins B&W used to put a freak graph of that speaker
Yeah.
in the box with, I think their 800 series did that, their high-end stuff, right? And but the frequency chart wasn't a frequency response graph like you're seeing with all this craziness, right? What it was a deviation from a reference curve.
Right.
So they would say, okay, this is the reference curve for this speaker.
Right, how close
that
it hit
we made.
what we were going
Yeah, it's
for,
kind of
yeah.
like matching a Harman curve.
It's misleading.
You know,
yeah.
and then saying, all right, now what's the deviation from that? Yeah, and normally, of course, it'd be pretty flat, right?
Yeah,
'Cause
right.
It'd be very, very deviation. But that
But-
makes more sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's telling you, this hit our design intent.
This one was made properly.
right.
Right.
And even
Doesn't
their
tell you how it
their
responds.
test fixtures, because I visited them in Stenning in the research years ago, and their test fixtures in the software and stuff they were running at the time were a pass-fail. Would they put a tweeter into a mini anechoic, shoot it down for it just to test the tweeter? They would test the driver separately,
Yeah.
and the thing would show a test fail right away on the part, and all it was doing is comparing to a reference curve for each
course.
driver too. You know, and that's the way you do it. Does it match what you expect? Yes. Okay, you're good. Not
Well-
is it flat? You know, does it look like this guy's target over there or Germany's
It's like anything,
target?
though, because what
know.
consumers don't really, I guess, what manufacturers don't want to tell consumers is that products need to be manufactured, and there are physical constraints and limitations in the manufacturing process. So there's no doubt measurements can be a useful tool to improve your manufacturing and provide some accountability for manufacturers and all that sort of deal. But the thing still needs to exist. It still needs to be made. So you could say it should measure like this or that, but if you can't physically do it, if nobody knows how to do it, it only gets so good. So to some extent, I think it's a useful tool to be able to measure things as a manufacturer, but from consumer side, I don't think it necessarily provides the value the consumers see it.
I remember a number of years ago. I don't remember how long it was, 4 or 5 years ago. Someone was interviewing one of the cheese balls at Sony. I don't know who it was, some guy at Sony, you know.
Yeah.
And he was talking to him, and he says, and he mentioned something about measurements, and the guy at Sony says, well, he kind of giggled, and he's like, and you think about, and I get it now, I get it then too, but the point is, just what he's saying is, well, we pretty much use measurements just to verify that through production, and what he meant by that is that they're making so many freaking headphones that if you have a problem somewhere, you could have 10, 20, 50,000 pieces with the problem before you
Right.
realize it.
Right.
So their whole goal in measurement is just to
QC.
make sure, just quick measure everything, quick as it's going through the production line to make sure nothing occurred, like the driver's something wrong, you know, anything go wrong,
Right.
and a part ain't meeting spec anymore, and that's where they find out, right? Yeah, so it's funny, but when you think about it, the volume of they're dealing with it, their only concern with measurements is that there's no running issue that we're just coming up against that we need to stop production and figure it out, you know? So
Yeah.
totally different take is what I'm saying, totally different angle on what they were concerned with measurements about. And I'm sure they measure when they do the R&D, but the point is once that's all done, they're just making product, you know? That's the kind of company they are, that's who they are.
But during R&D, like for us, the measurements definitely can speed up, you know, the process of making a new product, because we know what it sounded like before and we know what the measurements were before, right? So
Right.
we can measure it now, and then, you know, after doing a bunch of those, you know where, you know, what direction to go in.
And you also know your customer base, and you know what everyone, how they've used your product in the past. Yeah, there's a ton of history involved. Just like when I said, when you see cyclic trends through an industry, without history,
Right.
you have no idea if you're going in the right direction, or even as a manufacturer, you really might not know.
Right.
You know, and if you're using measurements as the gauge, I can tell you right now, you're going the wrong way already. It's not going to work because we're dealing with a subjective product, it's subjected to the people listening to it, And so anyway, that's our take on it.
Yeah, seems long.
Yeah, it does seem like we've been talking a lot.
I got about an hour left to ramble on that one.
Yeah,
I know. And chances are, all we'll do is go full circle.
I know.
We'll go
There's a
around.
lot to talk about.
Yeah,
It
I know.
really is.
There is a lot
I
to
think
talk
people
about.
don't consider most of the points.
Yeah. Well, the real thing is, does anyone really care? And then you get to a point where, do you understand? I guess you got to have perspective.
You got to step back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're just in the middle of it because we make this stuff for a living. But a lot of people, it's hard. I know in the past it's very similar to like explaining how a business runs to people that don't run a business.
Right.
They just don't understand.
They sort of don't care.
They don't
and that's
stroke the
understandable,
checks
right?
that pay the bills to do. I mean, you understand the simple stuff like you got
Right.
like at a home, running a home. Running a home is kind of like running a business. Just multiply that by 10,000.
Something like that.
All right. If you stroke 3 to 4 checks a month, all right, maybe 1,000. Let's say now you start stroking 100, 150, 200 checks a month. All right. That's the difference. So,
Well, it's kind of like that show, How It's Made, You see everyday products used all the time, and when you actually see how they're manufactured, like, oh, I had no idea that this much went into like this simple thing that you just,
yeah.
But yeah.
Well, it's true. There's a lot of it's an ongoing thing on a daily basis. When you're manufacturing, when you're doing anything in business, and it does flow and ebb. Things change. I mean, you're surrounded. We're all surrounded with people we have to work with, vendors and other manufacturers and retailers and distributors. So it's, but I think this whole measurement thing has gotten a little bit out of hand, and and we have one of the best test rigs available right now to prove it. And I wish there was a better way to put this, but there isn't. It's just gotten out of hand. It's not a way. It's really not a way to choose a headphone. Period. It's not going to work. We've proven that to ourselves in-house with our own measurements.
Yeah, you're not going to end up with a positive result if that's how you do it,
No.
most likely.
And I sure as hell wouldn't design on just measurements alone. It's not going to work either.
Well, I'm interested to see where Linus goes with this because they got an in-house little lab
Right.
they're working on. They're going to do this. We'll see where it goes.
It's going to
'Cause
take them time for sure.
They're going to probably be one of the most consumer-facing headphone measurement spaces out there. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting.
There's plenty of headphones to measure. Especially
Plenty
in
of
the-
headphones to
especially in the lower end.
Right. Well, there's so many. How do you evaluate them? If you have 100 different 500,000 headphones,
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
It's
that was
impossible,
the thing.
right?
A friend asked the other day, he's like, which one of these headsets should I get? I'm like, I
right.
don't
So it is an impossible
Yeah,
choice.
tell me about it.
Well, I don't know. Without hearing them,
So measurement sort of makes sense, but it also kind of doesn't. I don't know. We'll have to see where they go.
Yeah. On that note, thanks everyone for watching. Thumbs us up if you like this, and subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe because we're trying to hit 20,000 by the year, and we still got.
Yeah, you got to get on it. Got a ways to go.
Take care of that.